I never thought I'd find myself walking such a dark path. It began so innocently, or at least that's what I told myself at the time. I was curious, intrigued by the unknown and the forbidden. Growing up, I always felt out of place, like the world around me didn't understand who I was or what I wanted. That sense of disconnection made me search for something deeper, something that felt real. At first, it was just books about mysticism, harmless rituals, and exploring ideas that most people would dismiss. But as the months passed, I craved more. The moment everything changed was when I met someone who seemed to embody everything I was searching for. They exuded confidence, power, and an aura of mystery that drew me in. They spoke about the lies of organized religion and how the world we see is only a fraction of what truly exists. They claimed to know the secrets of power, freedom, and enlightenment, and I was desperate to listen. At the time, I didn't see it as a trap. I saw it as an opportunity to finally take control of my life. The rituals started small, lighting candles, chanting phrases I didn't fully understand, and offering symbolic sacrifices like food or objects. It felt harmless, even exciting. I told myself it was just a form of rebellion, a way to break free from the constraints of society. But soon, the rituals became more intense. The chants grew darker, the symbols more complex, and the sacrifices began to feel less symbolic and more real. I remember the first time I felt truly afraid. It was during a gathering with others who shared the same beliefs. The atmosphere was charged with an energy I couldn't explain, and for the first time I saw something I couldn't rationalize. It was as if a presence entered the room, a cold, suffocating force that seemed to watch me, judge me. Instead of turning away, I convinced myself it was proof that what we were doing was real. And if it was real, then it was worth pursuing. As I became more involved, my life started to change. On the surface, I looked the same, but inside, I was consumed by a growing emptiness. I felt like I was losing pieces of myself with every step I took. The promises of power and freedom began to feel hollow, but I couldn't stop. I was in too deep, surrounded by people who warned me of the consequences of walking away. Fear kept me chained to a path I no longer wanted to follow. The deeper I went, the more I realized how much I had given up. Relationships with family and friends fell apart, my sense of morality became twisted, and the things I once valued seemed meaningless. I thought I was gaining control over my life, but instead, I was losing myself. Looking back, I see how the initial curiosity turned into a slow, deliberate descent into darkness. I didn't just stumble into this world, I was led there, step by step, by my own choices and the influence of others. Even now, it's hard to explain what kept me going. Maybe it was pride, the belief that I could handle it, that I was strong enough to face whatever came my way. Or maybe it was fear, the fear of facing the emptiness that had grown inside me and admitting that I was wrong. Whatever it was, it blinded me to the truth. I wasn't gaining power or freedom. I was becoming a slave to something far greater and far darker than I ever imagined. As time went on, I became more deeply entrenched in the world I had chosen. The rituals, which initially felt like harmless experiments, evolved into something far more serious. What began as simple chants and symbolic offerings turned into elaborate ceremonies that demanded precision, secrecy, and an unsettling level of I didn't realize it at first, but with every ritual, I was giving more of myself away, my identity, my morals, The group I was part of wasn't just a gathering of curious individuals. It was an organized network with a clear hierarchy and a set of unspoken rules. There were leaders who seemed to hold the keys to unimaginable power, and followers who would do anything to rise within the ranks. The deeper I got, the clearer it became that nothing in this world came for every favor, every perceived success came at a cost, though that cost wasn't always immediately. I started to notice changes within myself. My thoughts grew darker, and my compassion for others began to erode. I stopped caring about the things that once mattered to me, like family, friendships, and the pursuit of genuine happiness. Instead, my focus shifted entirely to the group and the practices we carried out. They told me that this was a sign of progress, of becoming enlightened, but deep down, I felt more lost than ever. The rituals themselves became increasingly disturbing. What once involved only objects and symbols now included blood, pain, and sacrifices that felt all too real. Each ceremony pushed the boundaries of what I thought I could handle. And yet, I stayed. The pressure to conform was overwhelming. Leaving wasn't an option, at least, not without severe consequences. They made that abundantly. Looking back, I see how I was manipulated into believing that I was in control, when, in reality, I was being controlled. The leaders played on my insecurities and desires, convincing me that I was special, chosen, and destined for greatness. But their promises were empty, designed only to keep me compliant. The more I obeyed, the tighter their grip. The spiritual aspect of it all was undeniable. Strange things happened during the rituals, things that couldn't be explained by logic or coincidence. I felt the presence of something otherworldly, something both terrifying and captivating. At the time, I interpreted these experiences as proof that I was on the right path, that the power I sought was real and within my grasp. But now I understand that those forces weren't what I thought they weren't allies. They were predators, feeding on my fear and despair. Every day, I sank deeper into a darkness that felt inescapable. I didn't recognize myself anymore, and the life I had before seemed like a distant. My immersion in the occult wasn't just a physique, was a transformation, one that stripped away everything I once was. There came a time when the darkness I had embraced reached a level I could no longer ignore. I thought I had prepared myself for anything, but nothing could have readied me for the moment I was asked to prove my ultimate loyalty. It was during a private gathering, one where only the most devoted were invited. The atmosphere was heavier than usual, the air thick with an unspoken tension. The leader addressed me directly, telling me that it was time to demonstrate my commitment to the forces we serve. The request was clear and horrifying. I was to sacrifice a child. At first, I thought I had misunderstood. Surely this was a test, some symbolic act meant to gauge my resolve. But as they explained the ritual in chilling detail, the reality of what they were asking hit me like a tidal wave. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced with thoughts of escape, but my body was paralyzed by fear. I had heard rumors of others who had refused similar demands. None of them were ever seen again. Refusal wasn't an option, or so I believed at the time. The leaders spoke about the sacrifice as though it were an honor, a necessary step in achieving ultimate power and connection with the forces we worshipped. They claimed it was a privilege, a right reserved for only the most loyal. Their words were cold and calculated, designed to strip away any moral hesitation. But no matter how they framed it, I couldn't shake the sheer horror of what they were asking. For days, I wrestled with the command. The child they had chosen wasn't just a nameless figure. They were innocent, vulnerable, and completely unaware of the danger they were in. The thought of taking a life, especially one so pure, was unbearable. I couldn't reconcile the act with the person I had once been, no matter how deeply I had fallen into this world. Fear consumed me. I was terrified of what would happen if I refused, but I was equally terrified of what I would become if I obeyed. The weight of that decision was crushing. I started to feel the walls closing in, the suffocating realization that I had allowed myself to be trapped in a life I no longer recognized. I tried to rationalize my way out. Maybe there was another way to prove my loyalty, another way to satisfy their demands. But deep down, I knew the truth. This was the point of no return. If I went through with it, there would be no coming back, not just from the group, but from the person I would become. That night, as I sat alone in the dark, I reached a breaking point. For the first time in years, I prayed. I didn't know who I was praying to or if anyone was even listening, but I begged for a way out. I begged for strength, for courage, for something to stop me from crossing that line. It was in that moment of desperation that a small spark of hope ignited within me. I didn't have a plan, and I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't go through with it. That decision, though terrifying, marked the beginning of my journey out of the darkness. After refusing the unspeakable act they demanded of me, I knew my time with the group was coming to an end. But leaving wasn't as simple as walking away. It was a betrayal, and they made it clear that betrayal had consequences. The moment I said no, the atmosphere shifted. The people I once trusted with my life, who called me a brother, now regarded me with suspicion and hostility. I felt like prey being circled by predators. The leaders didn't confront me directly at first. Instead, they used manipulation and fear to try and break me. They isolated me from the group, spread lies to discredit me, and planted seeds of doubt in my mind. They claimed I had summoned forces that would destroy me if I didn't fulfill my destiny. Every shadow seemed alive. Every whisper carried the weight of a threat. Sleep became a luxury, and paranoia consumed my waking hours. But the final blow came when they stopped trying to convince me and started trying to destroy me. One night, I returned home to find symbols painted on my door symbols I recognized from our rituals, meant to curse or intimidate. I could feel the malevolent energy they carried, and for the first time, I truly feared for my life. It wasn't just psychological anymore. It was spiritual warfare. I started experiencing unexplainable phenomena. Objects in my home would move on their own. Doors would slam shut without warning, and a suffocating presence seemed to follow me wherever I went. It felt as though the forces I had once invited into my life were now turning against me. At my lowest point, I even considered going back, thinking that maybe compliance was the only way to stop the torment. But something inside me refused to give in. Call it stubbornness, call it faith, call it desperation. I couldn't let them win. I began reaching out for help, something I hadn't done in years. At first, I didn't know who to turn to. I couldn't exactly explain my situation to just anyone without sounding insane. But eventually, I found someone, a former member who had escaped years earlier. They didn't judge me, they just listened. For the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. They explained that the group's power came from fear and control. By refusing to give them that power, I had already taken the first step toward freedom. They also introduced me to the idea of spiritual protection, something I had scoffed at in the past but now desperately needed. Through prayer, counsel, and sheer determination, I began to rebuild the strength I had lost. Leaving wasn't easy. The threats didn't stop, and the spiritual attacks seemed to intensify the closer I got to breaking free. But for the first time in years, I felt a sense of sense that I was fighting for something greater than myself. Every small victory, every moment of peace, became a reminder that I could survive this. That period of my life was the hardest I've ever endured, but it was also the most transformative. It was the moment I stopped being a victim and started reclaiming my identity. It wasn't just about escaping the group, it was about escaping the person I had become and finding my way back to who I was meant to be. Walking away from the group wasn't the end of the battle, it was just the beginning. The scars they left on my soul didn't disappear overnight. I had spent years immersing myself in darkness, and the weight of my actions lingered, haunting me at every turn. I felt unworthy of forgiveness, unsure if I could ever truly rebuild my life. The shame was suffocating, and the memories of what I had done, what I had been a part of, were impossible to forget. But in the midst of my despair, I began to search for answers. I needed to understand how I had fallen so far, and, more importantly, how I could rise again. It wasn't an easy journey. Every step forward felt like a struggle, a fight against the person I had become. There were days when I wanted to give up, to let the darkness pull me back in. But something inside me refused to let go of hope. My first step toward redemption was finding faith not just in a higher power, but in the possibility of change. I started reading the Bible, not out of obligation, but out of a desperate need for guidance. The words I once dismissed began to resonate in ways I couldn't explain. Verses about forgiveness, grace, and renewal felt like they were written for me. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't alone. I also sought out others who had walked similar paths. Connecting with people who understood my pain and my struggles was both comforting and challenging. They didn't sugarcoat the reality of what I had been through, but they also didn't let me drown in guilt. They reminded me that redemption is a process, one that requires both time and effort. One of the hardest parts was confronting the harm I had caused, the relationships I had destroyed, the people I had hurt. They were constant reminders of the person I didn't want to be. Apologizing wasn't enough. I had to show through my actions that I was committed to change. It wasn't about earning forgiveness, it was about doing what was right, no matter how difficult it felt. The spiritual attacks didn't stop when I left the group. If anything, they intensified as I tried to rebuild my life. I would wake up in the middle of the night, feeling a presence in the room, or hear whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. At times, it felt like the darkness was trying to pull me back, reminding me of its hold. But instead of succumbing to fear, I fought back. I learned to pray, to stand firm in my faith, and to trust that I was no longer alone in this battle. Each day became a small victory. I began to see the world through new eyes, to appreciate the beauty and hope I had once ignored. Slowly but surely, I started to rebuild my life. I found peace in helping others who were struggling, using my story not as a source of shame, but as a testament to the power of grace and transformation. The path to redemption isn't easy, and it isn't quick. But every step I took brought me closer to the person I was meant to be. I wasn't just escaping the darkness, I was walking into the light, reclaiming my soul, and discovering a purpose I never knew I had. As I emerged from the darkness that had consumed me for so long, I realized that my journey wasn't meant to be kept silent. What I had endured, the choices I had made, and the redemption I found were too significant to stay hidden. I felt a growing conviction that my story could help others, those who were trapped in similar darkness, those searching for answers, and even those who doubted the reality of spiritual warfare. At first, sharing my testimony wasn't easy. Speaking about the rituals, the fear, and the depths of evil I had witnessed reopened wounds I was still learning to heal. I worried about being judged, dismissed, or misunderstood. But every time I hesitated, I remembered the countless people still caught in the grip of the occult, believing they were beyond hope. If my story could reach even one of them, then the pain of reliving my past would be worth it. I began speaking in small group church gatherings, recovery meetings, and even one-on-one conversations with those seeking guidance. Each time, I was met with a mixture of shock, curiosity, and, most importantly, encouragement. People thanked me for my honesty, for shining a light on the dangers of the occult and the power of redemption. Their support reminded me that my story wasn't just about me, it was a tool for awakening and healing. As I shared, I noticed a recurring pattern. Many people were drawn into darkness out of curiosity, loneliness, or a desire for control over their lives. They didn't start with malicious intentions, just as I hadn't. But they underestimated the power of the spiritual realm and the consequences of tampering with forces they didn't fully understand. By telling my story, I hope to serve as a warning, showing the real cost of such choices and offering an alternative path. One of the most profound moments came when I met others who had escaped similar circumstances. Hearing their stories and sharing my own created a bond that was both humbling and empowering. Together, we found strength in our shared experiences and in the faith that had saved us. It was a reminder that no one has to face these battles alone, that healing is possible when we walk together in truth and grace. Over time, my testimony began to take on a life of its own. I was invited to speak on podcasts, in churches, and even at conferences dedicated to spiritual warfare and deliverance. Each opportunity felt like a gift, a chance to shine light into the darkness and remind people of the hope that exists even in the most desperate situations. Today, I see my past not as a source of shame, but as a testament to the transformative power of God's love. Sharing my story is both a responsibility and a privilege, a way to honor the grace that saved me. My journey is far from over, but with every person I reach, I am reminded that redemption is real and no one is beyond its reach. If my story can help even one person break free from the chains of darkness, then every step of this journey will have been worth it.